Let's go live again to the plenary meeting of the UN General Assembly underway in this moment regarding extraterritorial coercive measures. We're going to now listen to the representative of Nicaragua.
Measures is recognized, negative effect on developing nations' economies. It also recognizes the fact that these illegal measures do not benefit multilateralism at all, nor do they contribute to creating an environment of peace or peaceful relations between states. Since 2000, the imposition of unilateral coercive measures has become a key tool of the foreign policy of some countries such as the United States and member states of the European Union. They have issued more than 26,000 sanctions, affecting almost 1/3 of the world population. These coercive measures are aggressions against the rights of peoples and their right to self-determination and the right to be free. It has been 40 years since the adoption of Resolution 38/197 of the year 1983, entitled Economic Measures as a Means of Exerting Economic and Political Pressure on Developing Countries. And yet, the United States and its allies continue imposing its imperial arrogance with complete impunity, leveraging its dominant position in the international economy and using these measures economically to bring pressure to bear or impose duress on the sovereign decisions of developing countries. The General Assembly has recognized the extraterritorial nature of these measures, or administrative, legislative policies and practices which are coercive in nature, which are adopted unilaterally against the development of peoples and the full enjoyment of their human rights. The General Assembly has established that developed countries must refrain from the threat of or the application of trade restrictions, blockades, or embargoes, or any other economic measures which are incompatible with the provisions of the United Nations Charter. The Charter of the United Nations enshrines sovereign equality of all states, yet both the Charter and international law are applied in a manner that is convenient to the imperialist powers, which have granted themselves the powers to create unilateral lists which not only manipulates human rights and democracy, but it also creates false pretexts which are contrary to international law and use false accusations which are leveraged, accusing countries of sponsoring terrorism. The Charter of Economic Rights and Duties of States, adopted in Resolution 3281 by the General Assembly in 1974, establishes that, quote, no state will use economic or political measures of any nature to promote the use of such measures with the view to coercing another state to obtain from it or the subordination of the exercise of its sovereign rights or to bring about advantages of any nature, end quote. Despite the fact that this charter is fully enforced, the blockade against the sister nation of Cuba continues to cause damage which is incalculable to that nation. It limits Cuba's access to medication, food, and basic elements necessary for health and life. We also condemn the inclusion of the sister nation of Cuba on the infamous list of state sponsors of terrorism. This is an instrument that is used by the United States and its allies to justify the adoption of illegal coercive measures with the view to bringing economic and political pressure to bear. This is in clear violation of the sovereignty of the Cuban state. Nicaragua demands the exclusion of Cuba from this unilateral list. Nicaragua, like other sister nations, continues to be a victim of these measures, which are in breach of international law, through extraterritorial laws and executive orders imposed by the United States. These are all clearly geared to destroying our economy to attacking our national sovereignty and to attacking the right of our people to its right to self-determination without foreign interference. It is unacceptable that a country or a group of countries would come here to this General Assembly to justify or pretend to justify the implementation of these criminal measures, self-proclaiming themselves as judges of humanity and imposing what they call sanctions. This is a violation of international law. No country can unilaterally, according to international law, be empowered or has the powers to establish these sanctions. The International Monetary Fund recognized Nicaragua for the implementation of appropriate economic policies and for its efforts to implement norms that relate to transparency and oversight of public funds. Also, in 2022, the Financial Action Group recognized Nicaragua's work in order to bring its efforts in line with fighting money laundering and financing terrorism, and bringing them in line with international standards, which resulted in Nicaragua's being removed from the so-called gray list. In March of 2023, the president of the Central American Integration Economic Bank qualified Nicaragua's implementation of these policies as exemplary with regard to the projects financed by international bodies. In the area of security, through our national policy implemented for the Citizen and Human Security Strategy, which is focused on persons, communities, and families, and with a gender focus. It includes all state institutions which undertake action which is multidisciplinary in nature, comprehensive, balanced, educational, or preventive. We also have a strategy called the Wall of Contention to combat drug trafficking, which is implemented in an interinstitutional coordinated fashion, which seeks to contain and capture as many drugs as possible and limit access to our national territory for these drugs. And thus, due to these efforts, these substances are no longer circulating through the country or continuing to transit through our country towards other markets, such as consumption markets in the United States or other consumer nations. And we are therefore preventing the destructive impact of these drugs, and in this way contributing to the region and the international community by investigating, prosecuting, and punishing all persons involved in drug trafficking. As a result of our strategies and policies put in place for security, Nicaragua now has the lowest level of homicides in the region. Between 2019 to 2023, the average annual rate of homicides is 7.2 for every 100,000 inhabitants. This rate is twice as low as the average of the Central American region. Nicaragua is working for peace, security, and fighting hunger and poverty, guaranteeing access to education free of charge, universal access to health care. While we are doing that, the United States are working against our people by applying illegal coercive measures in order to impede our achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals agreed within this very organization. The United States enacts extraterritorial laws, such as the so-called Law of Conditionality on Investment in Nicaragua, the NICA Act in English, approved in 2018. Or another example is the Law of Strengthening Nicaragua's Adherence to Conditions for Electoral Reform of 2021, known in English as the Renacer Law. By way of these laws, it seeks to block loans from institutions at the financial level internationally to Nicaragua. The clear objective of this is to impact the development of our social programs, which are financed with external aid. Through other executive orders, the United States has imposed the ban on new investments in Nicaragua and on imports or exports of certain products. Moreover, this is in contravention of international law by imposing individual measures on specific government civil servants The claim here is that they want to paralyze the functional direction of these institutions or leadership of these institutions of state and create obstacles for the capacity building of institutions such as our national police, the Army of Nicaragua, and the Supreme Electoral Council, not to mention the Public Ministry of Telecommunications. They also are implementing measures against the energy and mining sector of my country to slow growth economically in the country. Recently, in May of this year, the Treasury Department, in another attempt to destabilize Nicaragua, imposed coercive measures against the Center for Training from the Ministerio Interior of Russia and Nicaragua. This Center for Training provides cooperation in the area of knowledge and capacity building for police institutions in Central America, not just Nicaragua, but the whole region. This measure is clearly geared to paralyzing international cooperation and is a breach of the principles set forth in the United Nations Charter. These unilateral coercive measures are one more demonstration of the use of force and of a mechanism of interfering in the internal affairs of other states, all of which are banned by the UN Charter. This is a collective punishment against peoples. It is destabilizing the economies of these countries and impacts the standard of living of entire populations, limiting their access to food, medicine, water, sanitation, healthcare, housing, education, and jobs, the goal of which is to lead to social discontent and overthrow legitimately constituted governments. Typically, these coercive measures are based on false information and news and go hand in hand with negative stereotypes and hate speech against China, Cuba, Nicaragua, Russia, Venezuela, and other victim countries such as Zimbabwe, all of which are victims of these illegal measures. Coercive measures are not innocent tools of bland power. They kill just as much as bullets in a war. They kill with hunger. They kill with a lack of medication. And they are aimed at deliberately inflicting difficult living conditions on the people to lead to their physical destruction partially or completely. And that's called genocide. It is imperative that immediately economic, unilateral, coercive proactive. It should not limit or confine its actions to urging and condemning genocidal practice, which are in breach of international law. What is required is that this General Assembly adopt a resolution in keeping with Article 96 of the United Nations Charter, referring legal issues relating to the implementation with impunity of unilateral coercive measures that are illegal to the International Court of Justice and request an advisory opinion on the consequences of ongoing imposition of these measures and establish the obligation of indemnifying those countries which have been victims of the damage that has been caused by these measures. Thank you.